Good afternoon, everyone. I am Charles Whitaker, Dean of Medill. Thank you so much for joining us. As many of my Medill colleagues know, we were fortunate enough last year to receive a substantial grant from the McCormick Foundation for an ambitious enterprise that we're calling the Metro Media Lab. The goal of the Metro Media Lab is to insert Medill, our faculty, and our students into the Chicago media ecosystem in an effort to identify and help address many of the challenges that are threatening local news. This initiative has a lot of components, from research and training to sponsorship and mentorship for emerging news leaders. It also has something that we're calling Teach for Chicago Journalism. It's our take, if you will, on Teach for America. We're hoping to inspire young journalists of the future by working with Chicago public school students in their communities and getting them to consider the value of being the authors of their own community narratives. As we began discussing and fleshing out that initiative, we came around to the thinking that about this growing movement known as solutions journalism. And we wanted to factor that not only into our pedagogy, but also into the community conversations that we're having. In another stroke of good fortune, it happens that one of our distinguished alumnae, Tina Rosenberg, the Pulitzer Prize winning author, also is the co-founder of the Solutions Journalism Network. So we thought, who better to guide us in our thinking down this path than one of Medill's very own? And to our great delight, Tina graciously accepted our invitation to have a conversation with us here today. To help guide us in that conversation is our equally distinguished colleague, former Miami Herald and Washington Post reporter and current New Yorker contributor, Professor Peter Slevin. Peter?
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Tina, for being here. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We have a great crowd. We're up to 90 people. That's wonderful. I'm thrilled to have a chance to listen to Tina principally and hear about this philosophy that she's done so much to develop at the Solutions Journalism Network, which she co-founded. Where to begin in introducing Tina and to describe the career that has led her to this point? As many of you know, she has 2 degrees from Northwestern, including an MSJ degree in 1982. She wrote for the New York Times Magazine, the New Yorker, many other places. She spent a decade on the editorial page of the New York Times, being a Pulitzer finalist in 2001. She won a MacArthur Genius Grant at age 27 and used it to report in Latin America. She's written 3 ambitious books. And The Haunted Land, Facing Europe's Ghosts After Communism, won not only the National Book Award, but the Pulitzer Prize. We have lots to learn from Tina today, and the way I'm thinking we'll do it is Tina will talk for a bit about what solutions journalism is, give us some examples, talk about how she's applied it both in coverage and shared it with journalism schools. Then I'll ask a few questions and we will open it up after that. So Tina, thanks for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. It is a great privilege to be here to share about solutions journalism with the folks from my alma mater, Medill, which I'm always very proud of. And I really want to thank the people who invited me and made this possible, Matt Schrock, Stacy Simpson, Peter, Tim Franklin, and Dean Whitaker, Charles, for having me here today. So I am going to, I'm sure many of you know what solutions journalism is. Probably many of you have done solutions journalism, but for a couple minutes, let's assume that you don't know what it is. So I'm gonna really go over some of the basics. And then I hope we'll have a good long time for discussion after we start here. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to, being a journalist, start out with a story. Is that not advancing? Okay, so this is a story from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and I have my pictures in the way, but it's called a series called Toxic Neglect, Race, Racism, and Lead Poisoning. Cleveland, like many American cities, has a terrible problem with lead paint. And the paper had done several series and stories about it in the past. But they had something in common. Why am I having trouble advancing the slides here? I'm sorry. There we go. So according to Bree Zeltner, who was one of the reporters on the new series, well, I'll let you read what she said about what had happened in the past. So they had reported on the problem. It caused a lot of talk, a lot of blah, blah, but not much action. So there was really no improvement in how bad it was. This series, however, was different, and Solutions Journalism Network in our early days helped them do this differently. Let's see. That's right. So they did the usual investigative story on lead poisoning, this time looking at it through the lens of race and specifically different census tracts. But they also did something different. And this letter from executive editor George Rodriguez explains to readers and started out the series explaining to readers what it was they were doing that was different. We're going to look at what our neighbors are doing that's better and why is Cleveland not adopting those practices. So Rochester, New York was doing well overall on the issue of lead poisoning. So they sent reporters to Rochester to do a profile of what the city was doing. They also did little bites of the subject. Various cities around the Midwest, such as Grand Rapids and Akron, were taking a piece of the lead poisoning problem and doing better on that. And they published, as you can see, a sort of graphic piece that looked at the specific small bites and who was doing better and what those entailed. One thing I love is they also published this chart in the paper that looked at, here's what successful cities do, and here's what Cleveland does. And as you can imagine, this was profoundly embarrassing to public officials in a way that simply reporting on the problem is not. And this series had a tremendous impact. We're not going to go through all the impact, but there was immediate impact, ongoing impact over the next few years. And then finally, last July, the city council finally passed a complete overhaul of their lead poisoning work with new budgets, new staff, new projects, adopting the best practices that other cities had done. So what was special about the series? The solution stories in it took a problem that previously the city had been able to dismiss as unavoidable. And instead, it showed that it was unacceptable because our neighbors are doing better. So that is solutions journalism at its best. And I am the co-founder, along with David Bornstein, who I think might be on this call today, and Courtney Martin of the Solutions Journalism Network. We are an NGO founded in 2013. It grew out of the Fixes column in the New York Times that David and I and others write, which is still going today, a weekly solutions column. And our job is to help newsrooms do solutions journalism, which is rigorous reporting about responses to social problems and their associated results. And we have a lot of resources. We'll talk more about specific resources for teaching solutions journalism a little bit later. But I just want to mention a few of the many things we have. We have our Learning Lab, which has the basic toolkit available in 16 languages. And we have other toolkits available, including, you'll see the J-School Curriculum Builder. And something I'm very proud of, our Solutions Story Tracker. We collect solutions journalism, some done by our partners, some done by people we just stumble across, some submitted, because there's a button where you can submit it. We have a staff of 6 people who vet the stories, tag them, summarize them, and they're searchable in many different ways. And now we have more than 10,000 of them, which is quite an achievement. So solutions to almost any problem you can imagine, you can find them here. So what is solutions journalism? Our first big project was with the Seattle Times, and we helped them do something called Education Lab, which is still running. It started in 2013, but this was the first story. And you can read the caption to see what it's about. So here's a school that went from not very successful to much more successful. So what happened, and could it be replicated elsewhere? The question for solutions journalism. Sometimes we find that it's useful to help define solutions journalism by talking about what it isn't. So I'm going to go through a couple of solutions journalism imposters. These are practices that are often confused for SOJO. And the first one is silver bullet stories. The one on the left is, I'm embarrassed to say, ran in the New York Times, and it's about a soccer ball that doesn't deflate. And the first line of the story was, sometimes a soccer ball is not just a ball, sometimes it's a lifesaver. Well, that's overclaiming, and that is not good journalism. Instead, with SOJO, we tone down the rhetoric to limit it to, here's what the evidence says we can talk about. We just report on what's out there, what the evidence says. Second imposter is hero worship stories. These are stories that praise people for their good qualities like generosity, self-sacrifice. Not SOJO. First of all, SOJO doesn't celebrate or praise people. It reports on their work. And the work is the hero. They all have characters in them. Every good story does. But we're really using the characters to talk about what's the work here and what about it is successful and unsuccessful. Another imposter is the PR story, favor for a friend. Look at the first line on the left. The idea was genius, really. Okay, not good journalism. Instead, we report on what's working and what is not working with the same high standards we would use to report a problem-focused story. This one is a slightly more subtle imposter. A think tank story is where the journalist says, here's how I think we should solve this problem. It's theoretical and it's future-oriented and it's advocacy. Real SOJO is none of those. Solutions journalism is reporting on people responding to problems. If there is nothing to report on, you cannot do a SOJO story. Afterthought. A lot of us are guilty of this practice. The House I Live In is a documentary about the prison industrial complex that clearly the editor the director in the last few minutes decided, geez, this is really a bummer and I can't leave people like this. So he just mentioned a few things that people are doing to try and solve this problem. That's not SOJO. Real SOJO actually explores the solutions, looks at what they are, what makes them work or not work. Instant activist. These are stories that tell the reader or listener or viewer, here's how you can become part of the solution. Or they talk about how the news outlet has become part of the solution, which TV stations like to do. That's fine if you want to do it. That's not SOJO. SOJO is simply reporting the news in the same way we always report the news. The difference is the subject is an attempt to solve a problem. And then finally, my favorite imposter, Crispy Bacon, the disabled pig, whose owner made him a little wheelchair. I don't even know why people think this is solutions journalism. It's inspiring. It makes you feel good about the human condition. But real SOJO isn't just inspiring. Sometimes it's not inspiring at all. It's insightful. It offers information that society needs. So here's the 4 qualities of a solutions journalism story. First of all, it's about a response to a problem. It uses characters to talk about that response and how it happened. Second of all, it provides what evidence we have of results. It's interested in effectiveness, not just good intentions. Third, it's insightful. It offers information that's important for people who might want to apply the solution. And finally, it discusses the limitations, what is not working about it. It avoids reading like a puff piece. So why is SOJO important? What is it that SOJO brings to us? Well, several different things. First of all, it can make our reporting more impactful. And you saw that in the Cleveland Plain Dealer series. It takes away the excuses of people in power. This is journalism's theory of change. We bring out information on wrongs. Someone will then swoop in and solve those problems. How many of us are happy with how well that's working? Very occasionally, it can work, but it's pretty rare. And it's rare because that's not the way societies change. It's not the way people change. We need to know that better is possible and that people with our resources can do better. So I want to talk a little bit about the first story I ever did that got me into solutions journalism. It's the one that made me realize how powerful this practice can be. And the year was 2000. I was working for the Sunday magazine of the New York Times, and I wanted to do an investigative piece on the price of AIDS drugs in poor countries, and the fact that in countries with the highest AIDS burden, the drugs were so expensive that practically nobody could afford them. That at the time was widely known, but what was not widely known was the why. And the reason was collusion between the pharmaceutical industry and Washington, at the time the Clinton administration, but it didn't really matter, to put political pressure on countries which were interested in making or buying generic drugs. So I thought this was a really important story. I pitched it to my editor, and he said no. He said, first of all, it's too depressing. We cannot inflict another long story on our readers about how everyone with AIDS is going to die in Malawi. And it's not fresh. We already know that everyone with AIDS is going to die in Malawi. So I went home and I rethought it. And I turned the story inside out. There was one country that actually was making its own generics, providing them for free to all its people, and it was defying Washington and Big Pharma, and that was Brazil. So the story became what Brazil was doing, and then why other countries were not able to fend off the many pressures that Brazil was receiving. So in the process of doing the story, I said everything I wanted to say about the bad behavior, but it just had a different frame. And this was a much better story. First of all, it got into the paper. Very important. Can't have anything else if you don't have that. I didn't write the headline, by the way. Second of all, it was fresh. People knew that people with AIDS were dying in Malawi. They didn't know that in Brazil, those people were living near normal lives. It felt empowering and exciting to readers, and it had an impact. This story will be on my gravestone. And since that time, every time I tackle a subject that an editor would dismiss as too depressing or too familiar, I ask myself, is there a way of turning this inside out and starting from a solutions lens? So second of all, solutions journalism is just good journalism. Let me ask you all a question. Who here heard of the Ebola epidemic in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea in 2014? Raise your hand. I can't see you actually. Well, everyone's raising their hand, I'm quite sure. Who here has heard about the countries next door to those three who had Ebola outbreaks in the single or double digits and managed to control them? Fewer people, I bet. And wouldn't that have been important information to know at the time? How many people in the world know that there's a vaccine for Ebola that's 100% successful? How many people know that there's a cure for Ebola? My guess is that the people who know these things are a tiny, tiny fraction of the folks who knew about the outbreak to begin with, and that's just wrong. That balance is wrong. If we're going to be reporting on the bad, we should also be reporting on what is going on to solve those problems, especially when they're this effective. Covering the problems without covering the solutions leaves out critical information that's necessary for society to change. And it also gives us a really distorted picture about how competent everyone is out there. One of the reasons that we have so little trust in our institutions is that their successes are very frequently not covered. And then we have this favorite cartoon. That's not what we really want to leave our audiences with. So third of all, it can increase audience engagement and trust. The American Press Institute studied EdLab at the Seattle Times and found that compared to regular education coverage, it had double the page views, nearly double time on page, and more than triple the social shares. We see this over and over again. The Guardian's Upside section, which is Sojo, 1 in 10 readers shares one of those stories. This video from Fixes was the most shared story on the entire New York Times website the year it came out. We all know from the research that by far the biggest reason people tune out from the news is the negativity. And we all know this personally. We can feel this ourselves. We know it from people we talk to. We have to go on newsbreak because it's too much. It's bad for our mental health. The CDC has said that it's bad for our mental health. In 2008, the AP studied how young adults consume news, and they found the same thing. The negativity adds to the desire to tune out. But they found that when people think something can be done about a problem, they tune back in. So BBC World Service surveyed its under 35 digital audience, and they found that their top content request was more social. The New York Times studied its mobile users, who are not young, but they're younger than people who read the Times in other ways. What was their top content request? Well, it was actually more weather, but more solutions journalism was number 2. The University of Texas's Engaging News Project, as it was then called, did an A/B test. We supplied 2 versions of the same story. One had a solutions component and one didn't. And you can see the difference in how readers felt. I like the second one. I would read more articles from the same newspaper. There's a spillover effect. So I want to talk about trust. This is very, very important, especially right now. This is a list of New York Times stories on Brownsville, Brooklyn, which is a low-income community in Brooklyn. And as you can see, it's shooting, fraud, shooting, shooting, shooting. And if I could show you the rest, it would be shooting, 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 and shooting. And that is a distortion. The Tao Center at Columbia University had a focus group in Los Angeles among South Los Angeles residents. They're dissatisfied with local news. They want more sojo. Any group that considers itself marginalized in any way is dissatisfied with how the mainstream media covers them. And it's very obvious why. We go in and we look at them through the lens of their worst stereotype, and that's all we report on. One of our partners is the Montgomery Advertiser in Montgomery, Alabama. And the first time I went there, I asked reporters there, what do you guys think of mainstream media coverage of Alabama? And they all said, we hate it, it's terrible. Well, why? Because you always make us look like ignorant yahoos. Now, those stories might not be inaccurate. Accuracy isn't the issue, it's that they're incomplete. They said, we do a lot of things here that don't make us look like ignorant yahoos, and you're not interested in those. And that is true. We do not look at what is going on in communities, how people are solving their own problems, what is happening that is not the stereotype. It's as if we report on marginalized communities through that lens solely for the audience of the establishment. And I think all of us can recognize right now how incredibly unfair, racist, and toxic that is. And solutions journalism is a solution to that. Fourth, newsrooms can use this to create new revenue streams. This is a sample of some of our partners who are doing that. We can talk more about that if people are interested during the comments. So very briefly, how do we do solutions journalism? One thing that's really interesting with journalists is that if we report a story that says there's a real wrong here, and it turns out that we have gotten the story wrong, we have committed a journalistic misdemeanor. But if we report a story that says something's going right, and we've gotten that story wrong, that's a journalistic felony. It's not the way the outside world sees it, but it's the way we see it. Inside journalism, the most fearless investigative reporter can be terrified to do a solution story because he doesn't want it coming out looking like you're soft, you've been snowed, you are captive of your sources, et cetera. That is the biggest felony in journalism. And because of that, a lot of reporters who are interested in covering what works are scared to do it because they're not clear that they can do it without sounding like an advocate, a cheerleader, or a PR person. So our job at SJM is to show people how to do those stories with high standards. So this is what solutions journalism is, just reporting. When should we use solutions journalism? Well, it's an enterprise story. It's not for breaking news. It's about a problem that's widely shared. because any problem that's widely shared has lots of people trying to solve it, and some of those responses are going to be more newsworthy than others. You want something fresh because people are tired of reading or hearing about the problem. Info about the responses would be a public service, and there's something concrete you can go and report on and look how well it's doing. That's when you use it. How do we find the best solution? Well, the answer is it's not your job to find the best solution. There is no perfect solution. Everything has flaws, and if you acknowledge them, it will increase your credibility, not decrease it. So let's talk about those things. All we want is to look for a good story about someone who's doing something, usually because they're doing it better, and we just report on it. How do I avoid advocacy? So first of all, be careful in your language. Don't overclaim or predict the future. Just keep a snapshot of the present. Situate what you're reporting on in the full landscape. Talk about what else is going on briefly in a few paragraphs. What are alternatives to this? Or how well is this working somewhere else? And maybe the answer is not too well. Keep in your mind that your story is about the work. The place that's carrying out the program is really just the narrative focus. But your real story is about the work. So you're not really reporting on the organization. And then, of course, discuss limitations. And we can talk more about this in comments time. How do I avoid do-gooderism? As the editor of the Guardian's Upside section said, I don't want to run stories about some nice little NGO in Stoke-on-Trent. She said it with a different accent. Well, I think that is a danger, although a lot of stories are about projects that NGOs or businesses or governments are doing. But there's another way to find these stories, and that is start with the problem, chop it up into really tiny pieces, each piece a bottleneck that's keeping things from being solved, like the Cleveland Plain Dealer did when it chopped up the lead problem. And then with each slice, look at the data and see who's doing each slice better. We call that the positive deviant. Look for the positive deviant. This is a database of New York City hospitals and C-section rates, and you can see that the bottom one, Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center in Suffern, has a C-section rate of only 18.4%. That's a positive deviant. Its sister Good Samaritan Hospital in West Islip, nearly 50% C-section rate. Our normal tendency of journalists, if we got this database, is to write only about the negative deviant. But our story would be much stronger if we also looked at the positive deviant and compared the two. What's one doing that the other isn't? Another example, this from the Center for Investigative Reporting Reveal. They did a piece on women in jail in Oklahoma. There was one county that was doing much better than the rest on keeping women convicted of drug offenses out of prison, and that was Tulsa. So the story was about what was Tulsa doing that others didn't do, and what were the obstacles keeping others from doing the same. Okay, now let's talk about teaching solutions journalism. We have a wonderful tool on our website and a wonderful person behind it named Sarah Catania, who I want to thank so much for her help. She is our Director of Journalism School Partnerships, and I hope you all get to know her very, very well. So this is a great resource for teachers. I'll give you a second to look at what's inside it. This is the first page of it, and it has a little ad here for our Medium blog, which has a big section for J-School professors with great resources. This was Sarah's initial piece on why it's important to have SOJO in the classroom, to some of the stories from the blog. So more than 100 colleges and universities are teaching SOJO. Some of them have embedded it deeply in their curriculum, and it really shapes a lot of their curriculum. And those are some of the schools that do that. Dozens of other schools teach courses or SOJO modules that they drop into other journalism courses. And it's taught through various lenses: SOJO and investigation, broadcast SOJO, multimedia SOJO, community engagement in SOJO. And there are a lot of courses on SOJO with different subjects like addiction or gun violence, etc. So our Solution Story Tracker has a section you can search for. And if you look at the left in the column, you can see it says student journalism. So we collect student journalism. There's a lot we're missing, so please send it in. that's in both student news organizations and students who write for outside of college news organizations. You can see some of them here. And Sojo has helped many of our professors that we work with get their students' work into other news sites. For example, this was a student, Natalie's a student at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she did an investigation about the importance of lawyers for immigrants with a solutions component. Wisconsin Watch picked it up. Here's Lynn Milner's class at Florida Gulf Coast University, had a solutions partnership with local television affiliate. Purely because this was solutions focused, student stories aired on the TV news show and on the website. Xavier University in New Orleans had students place stories in the local African American publications. And just for fun, I'm throwing in this story. This was a former student, I think in his first or second year out of school, a great investigative and solution series for USA Today, which has made a huge difference in banning violent athletes in the NCAA. So those are some of the ways that our Sojo students have used those stories. So I am going to stop sharing my screen now, and we will bring it back to Peter for the rest of the program.
Tina, that was great. What a sweep of approaches and successes. 10,000 pieces, that's kind of a lot. It's a lot to keep track of, but we really appreciate that for sure. One of the things that I found very intriguing is from the very beginning, you talk about rigor. You talk about how this is fundamentally reporting. So it sounds as though it's not as though solutions journalism is a separate way of reporting. It's more an add-on that requires some really strong fundamentals to make it work.
That's right.
Tell us about how you see that rigor. Like, what is it that beyond the idea or coming up with a solution, what is it that you talked about trust and readers who are interested in it? What is it that is this kind of the secret sauce? What do you think it is that makes it a success with these groups who say they like it?
Well, I think that the trust aspect of it is a lot of it depends on the choice of stories. If you take a solutions lens, then you're not simply going to knock on doors in Englewood because of gun violence. You're going to go there to report on other things as well, including how people there are solving the gun violence problem themselves and other things that are going on in the community. People who live in Englewood know that they do a lot more things than shoot each other, and they want that reported on. They want that portrayed in the mainstream media. So that's a lot of the trust component. It's using, in a way, an asset framing instead of a deficit framing. Trabian Shorters, who runs the Black Male Empowerment Group, the Be Me community, talks about this a lot, and we are starting to work with Trabian on this, which is, what is it that a community has to contribute? What are its assets? And that's a really important lens at looking especially at marginalized communities that I think Sojo is very helpful for.
That's so intriguing, thinking about it as assets versus deficits. And you probably know that asset-based community development is a very Chicago thing that was developed, in fact, partly at Northwestern. When a reporter is looking for solutions-based journalism, you've focused on these grand investigations. Are there ways to do this in more modest ways and to infuse it in coverage, let's say shorter pieces, which is something that students here might be especially interested in before they get to their capstones? And how would that happen?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, if you're on a beat, then you're going to come across solutions on a neighborhood beat or on a subject beat in the course of your reporting, and you shouldn't discard them. I remember talking to a reporter at WHYY, public radio in Philadelphia, who was doing a story on wait times in local emergency rooms. And she'd gone to a lot where they were horrendous. And she said, then I went to one hospital, I forget what it was, and they had some system set up so that you had to wait like 10 or 15 minutes max. And I said, nothing to report on here, and I left. If you have a solutions lens, you include that in your story because it's really important. and make that part of your beat. It is not hard to do solution stories for beats that you're familiar with, where you feel you're on, you know what's going on and you're not on shaky ground. You can do them very easily and short, especially if they're about problems that you don't have to explain. You can then just go right to the solution, especially if they're starting from the positive deviant, because then you don't have to explain, why am I covering this? I'm covering this because the data says it's among the best, or among the best for its socioeconomic levels. And then you can just look at the how. So there's shortcuts for how to do solution stories short. You can do a 90-second broadcast piece, that's Sojo. You can do a 600-word story, not difficult at all. If you're going to another city to report on a solution story, that may take more time, first of all, because of the planning, but also because you want to be absolutely sure that what you are reporting on is worth reporting on. And if it's a new place, you need to do extra research for that.
And thinking about pitching stories, whether you're in school or out of school, you've mentioned that editors, producers seem to like these things. This is probably a dumb question, but are journalists pitching this, an individual story, as a matter of solutions journalism, let's say if they're a freelancer, or are they just incorporating it and so it becomes clear?
Good question. Many editors like these stories and look for them. Some editors, and especially sort of, some senses, the older and more time you've spent in the profession, the more traditional you are and the harder it is to change your views about what journalism is and redefine it, not as just covering problems. Some editors might not want the word solutions included in your pitch. And they might think it's a great story, but you might not want to pitch it as a solution story. Hopefully that's changing, but at the moment, you have to be the judge of that, I think.
So I'd like to ask a couple more questions, but I want to invite everyone who's listening and watching to submit questions for Tina. You'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen on the right, you'll see a Q&A. Type a question in there and I'll take a look and pass that question along. Your last answer brings us to an important point. Not everybody is sold, and maybe it's generational, as you suggest. What are you hearing by way of pushback to the very idea of solutions journalism?
Well, when we started, we assumed we would get a huge amount of pushback. We assumed that people's reaction would be, this is not kosher. This is just not real journalism. That has not happened. It is pretty rare to hear somebody who says, after we've had 5 minutes to explain it, oh, no, that's not journalism. They get it. The problem is they don't do it. And the reason they don't do it is the incredible constraints of resources that are in journalism right now. It's a two-way, it cuts both ways for us, because the reason journalism, a usually defensive profession, is open to new ideas is the fact that we know that we have to change or die right now because of our crisis, our economic crisis and our existential crisis. But those crises have also made it impossible for reporters to have time to think or to do stuff that's different. And this is just different enough that you walk out of a workshop saying, I really want to do this story. I have a great idea for a story. I can't deal with it today because I have to do 3 other stories today, but I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes. Right. And that is the big hurdle that has been most difficult to overcome.
One of the things we're all most intrigued about these days are the exploding, mushrooming number of startups around the country. Some are investigative startups, some are hyper-local. Are you finding solutions journalism is more widely accepted, is more interesting to these startups? And are some startups, in fact, focusing on solutions more than legacy news organizations, or is it kind of all over the map?
The answer is yes, they are focusing more than legacy news organizations. And that's largely because they are focusing on enterprise stories. There's very few startups that are there to cover press conferences. They really are trying to do high value stories that they feel readers can only get here. And so they're doing more Sojo. They're doing more investigative. Although investigative obviously is widely accepted. But if that's your focus, you're going to be doing more solutions journalism. And there are some that make Sojo a really important focus. There's also some legacy newspapers that do that too. Montgomery Advertiser has become really a solutions-focused newsroom, and some others have as well. But I would say going in, the acceptance is greater, and the chance that it will become a major part of your work is greater if you're one of these new startups.
Does it mean some organizations are doing less of another kind of journalism? Or is it, do you see
We're all doing less of another kind of journalism. Look, I mean, the new business model in journalism, which is not click related, it's trust related, it's value related, finally aligns the business model with good journalism. I mean, we're moving from a business model that sells a piece of the reader's attention to an advertiser to a business model that sells good journalism to readers or to other two types of funders. That's really important. And that is something that makes Sojo a great addition to your business model. And a lot of our partners have been able to raise philanthropic funds, raise corporate sponsorships, increase subscriptions and memberships through the use of good solutions journalism. One of the papers we work with is the Richland Source, which is an online daily in Mansfield, Ohio, a very rural, very red county. They've raised, I'm sorry?
Hometown of Sherrod Brown, senior senator from Ohio.
Is that right? I didn't know that. They have done a lot of Sojo, and they started a Sojo fund and looked for sponsorships. They raised $67,000 the first month, and since then have raised, I think, $232,000 in Mansfield, Ohio. So, I mean, this has appeal.
Fascinating, selling good journalism as the product. What a concept.
Yeah.
We have one question that's connected to this. One of the viewers is asking, can you tell me about some publications that focus especially on solutions journalism? You mentioned Mansfield, but if you're not submitting stories in Mansfield, where else might one look?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of magazines, like Yes Magazine calls itself Solutions Journalism is their subhead. There's a new magazine which we love called Reasons to be Cheerful, just started by David Byrne. Yes, that David Byrne. And they're doing a fantastic series right now called We Are Not Divided, which is all about successful projects that are bringing people together across divides. They're all Sojo all the time, and really good stuff. There's a lot of local news organizations that have a heavy Sojo focus, like Flint Beat, for example. The Current in Lafayette, Louisiana. They've just launched yesterday a great new Sojo series on the use of 211 and 311 phone calls in battling COVID. A lot of small local newsrooms that have the enterprise focus are using this quite a bit. And on our website, we have resources for freelancers. We have a big program for freelancers, and it has lists of news organizations that are interested in these pitches, editors that are interested in these pitches, and sample pitches that are very useful.
Great. Tina talked about providing people's work and not the person individually. Promoting people's work and not the person individually in solutions journalism. Can an individual's personality and character still come through in a piece without jeopardizing it as a solutions journalism piece? Where do individual profiles fit into this realm?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is yes. There are a lot of great solutions profiles. They have one big main character, but you're showing that character at work, and you're showing what else went into the work, and what worked about it and didn't work about it, and how that person, fought these battles. That's a solution story that's in the form of a profile, and those are very popular.
Got it. Carrie Leiderson, who leads the social justice program at Medill, points out that NSIA, ENSIA.com, does science and environment with a solutions focus, and it's connected to the University of Minnesota. Tell us a little bit more about how journalism schools are making themselves, beyond teaching, making themselves valuable to the overall solutions journalism project. Are they having partnerships with news organizations, doing it on their own?
Yeah, a lot of them, J schools have existing partnerships with news organizations, but some of those partnerships are now turning into solutions focused. There's a lot of collaboratives going on that we are helping to set up all over the country. Many of them include J schools. as part of that collaborative. They include other things like the public library too, but that can be a big thing. A lot of J schools are publishing fantastic magazines. University of Oregon and Temple both have solutions-focused magazines that they've done. That's professional quality work.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah is really the go-to source for all this. Sarah, is it possible for her to chime in on any of this?
I see Sarah is here, but Stacy, I don't know, or Matt, is that doable? If not, Sarah could type something and we could read it.
Yeah.
What is Sarah's full name?
Catania.
Yeah, let me see if I can.
And I see that David has put in the Q&A a list of 44 news outlets with dedicated solutions journalism sections. And the website is thewholesstory.solutionsjournalism.org, and with something to follow after that.
That's a little out of date now. I think some of those have closed and some new ones have opened, but yeah, that's right.
Got it. Do we have Sarah? Let's see. Yes, possibly.
I'm here. I don't know what I need to do.
Hi.
Am I visible? Hello?
You are.
Peter, you were asking about, can you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I'm going to respond to it appropriately.
Curious to hear more about how solutions journalism is connecting journalism schools with news outlets or vice versa, the collaborations that Tina mentioned.
Yeah, Tina, I think mentioned Temple. Philadelphia is a wonderful example. There's a lot of collaboration going on there among professional news organizations and students and student-run news organizations at Temple. They have, and what's also really exciting about that in particular is that some of the student-led publications in Philadelphia are actually serving as models for professional journalists in that community. So you have a couple of professors at Temple who are partnering with local news publications and also creating news publications that are capturing attention of professional journalists and becoming collaboratives that are emerging from the journalism program and becoming very strong in the community. So that's one model. Other models that are really exciting are, I think Tina showed a slide from New Orleans where Xavier University there, which is an HBCU, is partnering with the Black press in New Orleans to surface asset frame stories on the Black community there that were not otherwise being reported on at all in New Orleans. So those are just a couple of examples of different ways that professors and universities that are embracing the solutions journalism model are actually shifting the agenda and the news coverage in those communities.
That's great. That's really helpful to know.
Yeah.
Tina, do you have any further thoughts on that?
She's the authority.
And Sarah, thanks for putting together all that you have on the website to help journalism schools do this stuff. I'm going to ask another question, and people out there, please send in questions that you have. We still have some time. Ev Dennis asks, once a worthy problem is identified, is there a systematic method to identify sources? As you may know, the Christian Science Monitor pioneered problem solution journalism in the 70s and 80s, which I mentioned in a couple of books I wrote on news reportings. This early problem solution journalism was taught in a number of journalism schools, but has it perhaps died out? Thoughts about sources? Is it simply a matter of reporting on individual sources, individual people, or is there something broader?
I'm not sure if the question was about, once you've identified the problem, how do you find the solution sources, or once you've identified the solution, how you find the sources. But the process is similar for our traditional problem-focused reporting, with maybe a couple of tweaks. Like I would ask people in conversations about the problem, who's doing a better job on that? And you often get a lot that way. People who have a 30,000-foot view, an overview, are very good sources because they can say, oh, I'm here in Washington, but South Dakota has this great program. Academics, there is no subject under the sun that someone has not written a PhD thesis on, however obscure, and they can be a good source of information. Data is great. If you can find the positive deviant using a database, then that's fantastic.
Got it. You talked in your presentation about advocacy, which is such a tricky concept because in some ways the best investigative reporting is advocacy. You're identifying this problem, you're exploring it, you're exposing it, you're finding out who should be held accountable. But when it comes to solutions journalism, is there some nuance in there that you come across?
Such a fraught question, what advocacy is. You're right. I mean, and we're all proud when we create change in the world through investigations, but we kind of feel like it's not kosher to be proud of it when we create change in the world by highlighting a solution, because we don't want to be picking winners is the reason. And so how do we avoid that? We avoid that by the steps that I talked about earlier. Be very careful with your language. Make sure you're not saying this is the only thing going. You want to say, I'm focusing on this way of teaching math, but there's other ways of teaching math that have really also been successful, or this way of teaching math has been working in Austin, Texas, but it's not working in Memphis, Tennessee. And paint the landscape, give the context, mention other competitors or alternatives, and then just be sure you talk about here's the challenges that they haven't solved, or here's why it's working here, but it's going to be really hard to spread. Report on it. Don't celebrate it. Report on it. We know how to do that.
I think one of the things that we find with journalism students who say they want to save the world is they want to do advocacy, but as you imply, they may not be doing the work. They might just have the opinions. And so one of the cool things is you're talking about the rigor of doing the reporting, providing evidence, and then offering some thoughts, right? Some solutions, rather than just say, you know what I was thinking today? I was just sitting here typing and I came up with this great idea.
Right. We want to highlight for society what's going on that solves problems we all care about.
What's the downside? Is it the imposters that you're talking about? Is that where solutions
in what sense?
Sometimes gets a bad rep?
Yeah, I mean, people confuse it for stuff that isn't it. I mean, time is a big downside now. It can't be. If you want your news organization to survive, you have to do high value stories. There is no reason for people to buy your newspaper if you're just doing incremental, low value stories. And a lot of our partners have cut those out. They're doing briefs and they're doing high value enterprise stories. So that really shouldn't be a barrier. And once you've made that decision, there's no barrier. The barrier is in your mind, which is, how do I do this with journalistic safety so I don't look like a cheerleader? But there's ways to do that. And that's what our entire website is about and all our teaching is about. Our workshops and our newsrooms. We work with hundreds of newsrooms, starting with a workshop.
Well, and you're so right that we're conditioned that if a story is good news to be just a little suspicious about it. Often.
Oh, we should be. But do the work.
How do we respond? Gee, I don't want to do that because it's kind of good. Yeah. Are you finding people saying that?
Some. I mean, when we work with investigative shops like, Center for Public Integrity and CIR, and their instinct is, well, I don't want to burnish anyone's reputation. Well, I mean, you can look at it in a different way, which is you can say, I'm actually doing an investigative story on how bad our city is doing. And as part of that, I'm going to write about how good that city is doing. So that's a way of doing it that you can feel safe with. But, frankly, if your research has shown you that they are legitimately making progress on a problem that everybody's struggling with, why the hell not burnish their reputation?
Right.
It's the facts.
This is a connected question. Something else you talked about was journalists being scared to do solutions journalism because they don't want it to come out later that they made a mistake and promoted a solution that's not actually viable. How do you suggest reporters go about uncovering the full scope of a problem before zooming in on a specific slice and solution, especially in communities that they may not be familiar with? Let's say you're doing parachute reporting or you're just new to a beat.
Most of the problems we write about have been done to death. people do not need more familiarity with the problem. Occasionally that's not true. And you should probably, if something really new, then yeah, you should probably write about the problem before you write about the solution. But actually, you could do a piece that had both those things in it, starting with the solution. Depends. I mean, some stories are better that way. But yes, the problem needs to be established first. But that is rarely something we have to do ourselves. That is generally done for us by everything else in the world.
Yeah, so just one of the things I'm wondering about when you mentioned how many news organizations are interested in this. This is a kind of a question out of left field, but Report for America has become this formidable driver of coverage because for those who haven't followed it closely, Report for America is a nonprofit. It matches journalists looking to do interesting and meaningful work with news organizations that are willing to pay part of the cost of that person to cover a particular beat, particular issue, a community over the course of a year. And it's growing by leaps and bounds. Have you connected with them, or tell us about, first of all, how you see Report for America, but also how you see Sojo's work in connection with that?
I love Report for America. It's an inspired idea, and it's making a huge difference, and hopefully we'll start, we'll be even bigger. We have done training of Report for America cohorts, the journalists who come in, and newsrooms in certain regions. We would, to be honest, we have not had as close a relationship as we would like with Report for America. We would love to be able to be a part of their training of newsrooms that get Report for America core members. They are reluctant to add yet another thing onto a newsroom's plate. And so we're working with them to try and increase that. But at the moment, that has not been as much of a close relationship as we would like.
Got it. A question about elections. Has there been much prominent solutions journalism work about the problems with the electoral system, voter suppression?
Oh, yeah. We have a project called Renewing Democracy, which has hundreds. We funded and trained people to do hundreds of stories, treating elections and democracy as a subject matter. You can't do Sojo about politics in the breaking news sense, but you can do it if you treat politics and the workings of democracy like the educational system or the health system, something that has improvements that can be done. There's a lot of that out there. Go look on our story tracker and search under the democracy and community development heading, and you'll find maybe 1,000 stories.
I think that would give us something to do for the weekend, if nothing else.
It's a little late for this cycle, but yeah. But no, we've been doing that for a couple of years now. So those stories probably made a difference in a lot of communities.
Yeah, the fight over democracy, I don't think is going away, is it? And then finally, and we're down to our last couple of minutes. The last question we have from someone watching is, has there been interesting solutions journalism work on the media itself? And how the media, which comes in for such criticism in so many different ways, could do better?
That's a great question. Let me think about that for a second. Not enough. There's certainly a lot of criticism of how the media isn't doing a very good job. There is Sojo going on in publications with a media audience, like Neiman Lab or Pointer or CJR. They do a lot of Sojo about the media. But for a broader audience, I would say we could use a lot more of that. Thank you for suggesting that, whoever did.
That would be Carrie Liderson, the great
Thank
Carrie.
you.
Thanks. Ev Dennis asks, is there somewhere we can contact Tina? I want to thank you for an excellent, thoughtful presentation, and on a Friday afternoon, no less. So a sentiment that we can all second.
Oh, is it Friday?
I believe, yes.
Yeah. My email is tina@solutionsjournalism.org.
That is great and succinct and all. I'd like to thank you, Tina, so much. I know I feel an awful lot smarter about how this works, and I certainly feel grateful for you spending this time and going into some detail with questions from the audience as well. Thanks a million.
Thank
Allow
you,
me to-
Peter.
allow me to
Thank
echo
you.
that,
This has
Tina.
been a pleasure and an honor.
Yes, allow me to echo that, Tina. Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I feel both informed and inspired. And thank you, Peter, so much for conducting the conversation. And thank you, Stacy, Matthew, for making this all happen. And thank you all for joining us.